TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Today on CityCast Philly, on Passyunk Avenue, news that a beloved coffee shop is getting kicked out has some neighbors boiling over. The building landlord says the shop, Black and Brew, has unpaid bills. The shop's owners swear they've paid the rent. But there's twist to the story that even has some neighbors questioning who's telling the truth. It's Monday, January 29th. I'm Trinae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Victor Fiorillo, senior reporter at Philadelphia Magazine. Glad to have you back on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Victor, tell us about Black and Brew. How long have they been open? What's it like inside?
So Black and Brew is a cute little cafe, very family-friendly, family-oriented down on Passyunk Avenue in the Passyunk Square neighborhood. It's been there for 17 years. So by recent Passyunk Avenue standards, that's a pretty long time. You know, There are a lot of businesses that have come and gone. And there is, in fact, a lot of gentrification that goes on in the neighborhood. The cafe is really beloved by locals. Some people go in there and they do their work. Some people bring their kids in there on Saturday morning. It's just a great neighborhood place.
I'm sure I've been there, but I'm not sure. But I do know that they have that mosaic, artistic, exterior at Black and Brew, right?
That's right. They have the glass and mirror mosaic walls outside, which I imagine were designed by the famous Philly artist Isaiah Zagar. It's certainly his style, and he does a lot of work in South Philly, but I don't know for a fact that they are his.
Gotcha. I want to talk about how residents feel about this. I mean, having your local coffee shop, place where you get your favorite hot coffee in the morning or meet up with friends can be kind of sad to hear that they're actually closing. We actually saw some notes from people saying some of their sentiments about this place. Someone named Theodore says, B&B is the heart of Passyunk Avenue. We sure hope a new location can be found. Deandra says, I love this place. I hope they can stay on the Ave. What have you heard from folks about the news that they could be closing?
So we have a tip page, of course, where people can come and leave us tips for stories. And every day I run a column and I run, my tip box in that story. And one day, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, I just started getting, usually you get, a tip here, a tip there throughout the day. But there was clearly some orchestrated campaign to have us write about this because we just kept getting tip after tip after tip that this beloved cafe was going to be closing.
Okay.
And people were upset. They weren't really sure what was going on. They were concerned that this beloved cafe was getting pushed out by the landlord without any good reason. And so I decided to look into it because the neighbors were obviously concerned at the time. The cafe hadn't said anything publicly yet. So it just seemed like one of those situations where it's a neighborhood concern, a neighborhood dispute. And our job as journalists is to figure out what's actually going on because a lot of people say things on social media that sometimes aren't true. I think the other thing about Black and Brew, and one of the reasons that it's beloved, is that it's owned by two women who are married to each other. And if you think about the fact, all of us here don't really think anything when we hear that now. The world is a different place. But 17 years ago in South Philly, to have two women, owning a business right in the heart of South Philly, who are a couple, I think at the time, if we really think about what South Philly was like 2 decades ago, it wasn't quite as accepting and progressive as it is today. So I think that's another reason why this cafe just sort of stuck out. It's like, people just love that these two women, are sharing love and sharing their business together.
I see. This is a beloved business in South Philly. But when did the owners get a notice that they had to go?
So this gets kind of interesting. And since I originally wrote about this, there have been some interesting developments. But in December, they're told that they know that their lease is coming up in, I believe, February. So February 2024. And they get a notice in, I believe it's December, from their landlord. And I should mention that their landlord is the Passyunk Avenue Revitalization Corporation, right? So it's one of these like neighborhood groups. And they are technically a nonprofit. So the women who own Black and Brew, they get this letter saying, we can't really renew your lease because you have these unresolved financial obligations. So the women at Black and Brew think like, oh, well, we had that pandemic rent that we were supposed to pay while we weren't open. So the landlord made a deal with them. Listen, you can keep the lease while you're not open. You're forced to close. Pay me half the rent. And then once you reopen, you get back up to full speed. Apparently, they got a little behind with that. But if you talk to the two women who own the cafe, they say that they have canceled checks, that they have everything paid up, and that there is no back rent that's due to Park.
Interesting. We'll hear what the landlord says after the break. Plus, there's some more twists in this battle brewing on Passyunk Avenue. This is CityCast Philly.
All right, everybody's ready to go? Just 12 hours between mommy and a margarita. Oh, you gotta be. Don't let a stuffy nose block your good time. Children's Afrin provides 12-hour all-day or all-night relief of nasal congestion from colds or allergies. Afrin, the wow is real. Use as directed.
Taking a tour of where your finances can go? Good plan. See how Northwestern Mutual's approach to financial planning is designed for your goals. Goals like protecting loved ones, growing investments, and planning for retirement. With our interactive tour, you'll discover how growth and protection work together to help make your dreams a reality. See what goes into a good financial plan at northwesternmutual.com/tour. The Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Victor, you reached out to the building's landlord. What did they tell you?
The landlord told me that using the same language from the original letter they sent to Black and Brew, that the two women have unresolved financial obligations, and that for that reason, the landlord is going to find another tenant. They're not going to renew the lease. So this is after I had already spoken with the owners of Black and Brew. This is before I wrote anything. And I said, I need to go back to these two women, and something doesn't make sense here, right? Mm-hmm. So I went back to them and said, listen, the landlord is saying you have this unresolved financial obligation. You're saying you don't. Like, where's the truth here? So we wound up running the story. They swear they don't owe any back rent. So then it came to light, and this is something I have not written about, but it came to light that very, very recently, Black and Brew was hit with a lien. I believe it's a state lien in the amount of tens of thousands of dollars for unpaid taxes to the city and state. Mm-hmm. So then we wondered, well, wait, the landlord would probably be aware of this, right? If the landlord is investigating them, and if the landlord becomes aware that there's a lien against Black and Brew for tens of thousands of dollars, well, they might not want to renew that lease because it might not be a good bet, right? You would rather get somebody in who's not tens of thousands of dollars in the hole in unpaid taxes. So I went back to Park, the landlord, and asked them if that is what it was about. And they told me in no uncertain terms, no, they owe us rent, and they also owe for utilities.
Okay.
went back to the two women behind Black and Brew again, and they just said that's not true, that they don't, and that they were unaware that there was a lien against them in the amount of tens of thousands of dollars.
Victor, this sounds so messy. I mean, when rent is due, rent is due. It's hard to kind of dispute that. I mean, has anyone shown you receipts or any proof of this so-called tax lien?
Well, anybody can see the tax lien because it's a matter of public record. If you just go search in Common Pleas Court in Philadelphia for Black and Brew under their business name, you'll find a number of liens against the business. The most recent one, again, being for tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes. Now, again, I haven't written about that, and I haven't written about the owner's response to that. They say that they were unaware that there was a lien, but they did just recently enter into a payment plan with the city for unpaid taxes, though it's not exactly clear to me if they're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes or some of the previous liens for unpaid taxes. As far as the city and the state are concerned, this business owes a lot of money in unpaid taxes. I think that much is clear.
So is there any reprieve for Black and Brew? Could they somehow, some way, keep their doors open?
I think they will keep their doors open, or they certainly intend to, but not at that address. They are planning to, the last time I talked to them, move the operation to somewhere else in South Philly. It sounds to me like Park, the landlord, has no intention of renewing their lease. And Black and Brew now has a GoFundMe going, raising money for potentially relocating for the costs that might be associated with that. But it's a little bit unclear to me. Like you said, it's messy. What about all of this money in back taxes that you have to pay back? But you have to make that money, right? You have to make the money to pay yourselves. You have to make the money to keep your lights on. You have to make the money to pay your employees. And then you also have to make the money to pay those taxes that are unpaid. You asked me about paperwork, about the taxes. There's also the question that people have raised of paperwork about the unpaid rent. There are images out there floating around of statements showing Black and Brew paying their rent. But the thing is that the landlord isn't going out there and opening up their books, and they have no obligation to, right? They're a landlord. They've decided not to renew somebody's lease. They're under no legal obligation to open the books and say, here's the last 2 years of statements from this business. That's part of the thing here, I think, is that the neighborhood is outraged about this, but we also have to keep in mind that we live in a capitalist society. The landlord owns the building. The landlord wants these people out. Now, there's another bit of a twist to this story, which I also have not reported on, but it turns out that one of the owners has a Twitter feed that some on social media have described as MAGA and anti-vax.
Okay. So how does that play into all of this?
It plays into it from a public relations perspective, right? So now a lot of some of the people who you had rallying behind you are now not rallying behind you so much. People are saying, well, wait, I thought they're lesbians. How can they be MAGA? It's like, well, no, there are actual LGBTQ people out there who are MAGA. So, and I'm not saying they are MAGA. What I'm saying is that there's a lot of talk and chatter out there, and there have been people posting quotes from the one owner's social media feed where they appear to be saying things that people might identify as MAGA or anti-vax. So now some people don't love them quite so much.
Ah, I see. Now, Victor, when you spoke to the owners of Black and Brew, they say they feel like the landlord wants to get rid of them and increase the rent. But after all that you just shared about the unpaid bills, tax liens, and the Twitter feeds, do you feel like that's true?
I think that the story behind Black and Brew is a complicated one and one that hasn't been completely figured out yet. I think that someone is not being truthful. The landlord says they owe rent. Black and Brew says they do not owe rent. I don't know which of those parties is being disingenuous or untruthful, but it's clear that both things can't be true at the same time. And I think this is a very complicated issue. There is gentrification involved. I'm sure that the landlord has ideas for what they want to see in that space, and that maybe Black and Brew doesn't, fit in with that. Maybe they already have some other, high-end tenant in mind. So it could be both things can be true, right? It could be true that Black and Brew is partially being pushed out because of gentrification, but also partially because maybe the landlord doesn't think that somebody with tens of thousands of dollars of state liens against them is a good tenant to have. And maybe they're also behind in their rent. Like sometimes I think we try to view everything in this world as like, it's A or B. You're with us or you're against us. Mm-hmm. But no, maybe this is just a little bit more nuanced. Maybe you have married lesbians, one of whom is a MAGA anti-vax person. And maybe Park also is owed money by them. And maybe it's also a great cafe that people love. Like all of these things can be true, can't they?
Victor Fiorillo, senior reporter at Philadelphia Magazine. Thank you so much for breaking this all down and for joining me on CityCast Philly. Thanks for having me. Read Victor's original story by clicking the link in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Let us know what you think of this episode. Tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.